All right, everybody, what is going on? Good afternoon. Checking in during the short gap we have between the early games today and the late games today because we've got a little bit of finality on a couple of points going into the postseason. So, first, we'll start with this because this is obviously the big one. The Falcons beat the Saints 19-17 was actually a pretty good game, pretty compelling game. Falcons did what they needed to do, got the win. And what that means is, first of all, the big thing, the Panthers get to the postseason as NFC South champs. So they will be playing either the Rams or the Niners in their first playoff game. It depends on what happens in this afternoon, but we now know the Panthers are a postseason team, and that means that there is a chance, although somewhat unlikely, I would say, that we play them in our first playoff game. So think about that. All right, guys, let's take a minute so I can tell you about Sleeper, a one-stop shop for all your sports needs. You can celebrate and chat on sports games in real time with other users. You can get the fastest scores, blazing fast sports news and sports alerts right at your fingertips. And of course, you can use Sleeper to play in fantasy leagues and win real money on picks contests. This is the way sports were meant to be enjoyed together. So download Sleeper today. Use promo code SBN to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And you can pair that with another promo they have right now where you can get a $20 entry free with no deposit required. So get both of those things going. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states and growing. So check out Sleeper today, get to it, and go have some fun with sports this year. So obviously everybody's going to feel a little differently about that. Tampa Bay, high ceiling, but very low floor as they've shown. So not having them in the playoffs is definitely, I would say, lower variance. Now, Carolina, which is the team that is getting in instead, is a team that has beaten the Rams. They've beaten the Packers this year. They have done some good things, so it's not like it's completely out of the question that they could beat a team that is considered to be a top NFC contender. But if you look at them the last couple of games, it feels like they've kind of crammed up against the ceiling a little bit here, and it may not be in the cards for them either. So go ahead and speculate on whether or not this is good or bad for Seattle. In all likelihood, it won't affect Seattle all that much. The main effect would be, which team do you think has a better chance of beating the Rams in the first round? So beyond that, there's really not too much else to say here in terms of that. Again, it is possible, just relatively unlikely, that Seattle is able to face the NFC South winner. But let's keep it in mind going forward. Stranger things have definitely happened, and I'm open to a lot of possibilities here. The Rams have not played good these last couple of games here compared to their standard, right? Their defense in particular has looked very weak. So I do feel like an assortment of outcomes is in the cards here. Now, there's another thing that happened with this game's result, with the Falcons winning, and it has to do with that draft pick, which I've spent a lot of time talking about this year, but now we can finally start to put this to bed. The Atlanta Falcons pick now sits at 13th, and it cannot really go low. It cannot really go up from here. There's really nothing that can happen that can get the pick to jump over Dallas because Dallas is now officially lost. Miami could win, but even if they do win, their strength of schedule means they're going to be picking ahead of Atlanta. So 13th is now the worst case scenario. And there is a possibility that if the Lions lose and the Ravens lose, that pick could be pulled down a little bit more down to 14th or 15th. So going to be monitoring the Lions and Ravens game, but the worst has been averted. We can now say that with 100% certainty. That Falcons pick, which at one time looked like a disaster that it was going to LA, is now more of just a minor annoyance, especially in a draft that looks as mediocre as this one. But we want Detroit to lose, and we want Baltimore to lose later today to try to make things just a little bit better. So we'll talk more about that later. But This was a good result, in my opinion. I know that getting Tampa Bay in the playoffs would have been maybe, maybe a little bit more intriguing if Seattle had lost yesterday. But given that Seattle won yesterday, I think that that impact is pretty much moot. And I think actually getting Carolina in is probably better because, again, they're the team that has actually beaten the Rams in the last couple of months here. Okay, so that was the number one thing that happened in the early window that affected Seattle. But there is one more thing, and I do want to talk about this because I don't want to sleep on this. Houston actually blew it. They didn't blow the game, of course. They did win the game, and they didn't even necessarily need to win the game. It wasn't that important. But they blew the number one scoring defense in the NFL. And once these numbers get punched into the ESPN database, Seattle will have the number one scoring defense in football for 2025. No team allowed fewer points or fewer points per game in 2025 than Seattle officially. So I was kind of already giving up on this one because it was a game against Riley Leonard and the Colts, and Houston did actually have some playoff positioning to play for. They played their starters for the first half, but then you got to the second half, excuse me, and they kind of laid down. Now, Indianapolis scored 17 points in the first half, so Indy earned their points against Houston's number one defense. I'm not here to take that away from them, but either way, however you slice it, 30 points was not a marker that I thought the Colts were going to get to today, and they did, and they only needed, I believe, 28. So that was sufficient. We now have the number one scoring defense in football officially. I don't think anybody else can really mess with that, and it's not like anybody's defense can allow negative points. So we are good. We have the number one defense in the NFL for the first time since 2015. So 10 years ago, we had the number one scoring defense. That was the fourth year in a row we had the number one scoring defense. Now we have it yet again. Beautiful way to end the season. I know it seems kind of meaningless because Houston wasn't even trying in the second half of this game all that hard, but it still means something historically. So I'm going to be happy about that. I'm going to take that. I'm going to gladly embrace being the number one scoring defense in football. And after a game like they played yesterday, where they allowed 3 points and less than 175 yards, they certainly deserve to be considered the top defense in football. So great news there. I'm definitely going to be happy about that. We do have some interesting stuff going on in the late games now. I'll talk about that later, but I did want to just check in here real quick before the afternoon games start. And oh, Myles Garrett got his record. Myles Garrett did get the record, so that was also kind of cool. He doesn't have a lot to celebrate these days, so it was cool to see him get something to celebrate. And yeah, that's the 4-1-1, guys. So Falcons win, Panthers get in. Atlanta's draft pick is now preserved outside the top 12. Let's see where it can get pushed later today. All right, go Hawks. See you guys later. Everybody have a good rest of your Sunday.